I was going to have to channel all this into something, or I was going to self-destruct, which was the crow, to vent all this anger and frustration and rage. So it became my therapy for a long time.
The Crow was birthed from suffering, and it started around the new year of 1960 in a trailer. James O'Barr was born while his mother was drunk, and as a result, when she was asked his birth date, she couldn't remember, and therefore for the rest of his life, he was never sure of his exact birthday. His mother gave him up for adoption, and he was raised in orphanages and foster care until he was adopted at age 7. But that didn't mean he had a good family. He stated it was worse after he was adopted, as there was abuse and neglect. Some of these people should not be allowed to have pets, let alone children. As a result of his upbringing, his connection to others was minimal. I had a difficult time communicating with people, so I worked on other skills, writing and drawing, to get my ideas and things across that way. By the age of 16, he was an avid reader and often escaped into that medium for peace, and that included comics. He drew his own stuff, and there was a time he would show his work to other artists, but he received little encouragement, so he mainly kept his doodling to himself. But then he met someone who would change his life. When I was 16, I met this girl, and she was like the best thing that ever happened to me. Up until that point, my life kind of felt like an endurance test, and I felt like I finally got to the end of it. Good things were finally going to start happening to me. And so I was with this girl for 3 years, and we were engaged to get married when we graduated. And she was like my whole world. A couple of weeks before her 18th birthday, she was killed by a drunk driver. That was like completely devastating to me, and I had no idea what to do with my life then. I was just filled with such anger and frustration that I thought I was going to destroy myself. So I carried this around for a couple of years, and I just felt like I was full of poison.
I don't know if I actually believed in a God, but if I did, then I really felt betrayed by him. That, why make this beautiful, perfect flower and then just trample it afterwards? What was the point in that? What was the meaning of that?
To deal with this, O'Barr focused on his writing and drawing to escape further, but his work was affected by his anger and bitterness towards his situation. Since O'Barr's lost love was Catholic and he was raised as a Baptist from his adoptive parents, that imagery infested his drawings, and as he drew, his anger towards God for what happened was a big part of his style. O'Barr had nowhere to go and zero direction for his life, and so he decided to join the Marines in 1978, mainly because in the military you were told what to do with your life, and he stated he needed that. During his early tour, he was stationed in Germany. The isolation during this period of his life is what created The Crow, as he was constantly alone, and he drew his own comic. One day I just began drawing The Crow. It came pouring out of me. My character Eric is able to return from the grave because some things just cannot be forgiven, and I believe that there could be a love so strong that it could transcend death, that it could refuse death, and this soul would not rest until it set things right. Everything in The Crow was manifested from O'Barr's experience. The religious overtones, his home city of Detroit was the setting. Every character in the comic was based mostly off people he knew, and Eric was honestly an amalgamation of himself. There was also an incident that occurred in Detroit where a couple was killed for a $20 engagement ring. He used all of this to birth the world. He also stated he picked The Crow as a guide, as it feeds off dead things, while Eric creates dead things. He likened writing The Crow as picking a scab rather than something cathartic, and for some time he kept his work to himself. When he left the military, he returned to America and decided to send out his first 40 pages to publishers who either just didn't get it or complained about the tone. After working as a mechanic for a few years while querying publishers, he felt like his work would never see the light of day. So at 32 years old, he completely changed gears and went to med school looking for a challenge. But it would only last 2 years, and he would find himself with little money working at a comic store in Detroit called Comics Plus, which was owned by Gary Reed. The Crow was pretty much dead as far as O'Barr was concerned, and he didn't work on it. Due to money constraints, he would have to abandon medical school. Since O'Barr had artistic skills, he would paint and draw t-shirts for the store, and after a short time, the owner of Comics Plus asked if O'Barr did any comic strips. He brought in The Crow, and Reed loved it. He asked if he could publish it, and it was one of the early titles in the early days of Caliber Comics. The Crow released to newsstands on January 1st, 1989. In its first year of publication, 4 printings occurred, but Caliber Comics began having financial problems. And then a bigger comic company swooped in to buy the rights for The Crow, called Tundra Comics. The Crow series consisted of multiple issues, and this was the tale they told. The comic began with a thief named Jones carrying a radio that he just stole. He turns around a corner to find the ghostly image of Eric standing in front of him. He drops the radio, and Eric tells the man he knows Tom Tom, Top Dollar, Fun Boy, and Tintin. The angry thief, impatient and filled with rage, stabs Eric to no effect. Eric threatens the man to tell him where they are. He says he will cut off his fingers or toes and feed them to him, and the man spills the beans. He then lets Jones live, telling him to tell everyone he's coming. Then Eric would be in his loft, remembering the night Shelley died, while across town, Tintin is making an arms deal for a .38 revolver. Tintin sees an old lady passing by and shoots her coldly to test the weapon, and then, when one of the sellers objects, he kills them coldly. Tintin flees into an alley where he runs into Eric. Eric disarms him and forces Tintin to remember the night where he killed Shelley and Eric. As Tintin realizes he is talking to the man they killed, Eric murders him. Eric then returns to his loft where there are pictures of Shelley everywhere. He remembers something about a crow, but doesn't fully realize that he's back from the dead. We then cut to a meeting where Top Dollar decrees he is the law, and someone sees something outside the window. They go to check, and when someone looks outside, they are shot dead, and Eric enters the room. A gunfight occurs, but Eric easily slaughters everyone until only Top Dollar is left. Eric makes Top Dollar remember the night of Shelley's death too, and with fear achieved, Eric kills Top Dollar. Then we go back in time to see moments with Eric and Shelley is literally the image and embodiment of O'Barr's lost love. The moments in the comic are actual moments that O'Barr shared with the love of his life. They are real memories, and it's important that anyone ever seeing these comics and the movie understand this. The flashback ends with Eric holding a present for Shelley, who is long gone. The present is a cat, and he sobs, stating she always wanted a cat, and now the cat is their anniversary present. A crow then appears, telling the boy there is work to do. In the comic, no one but Eric can see the crow, unlike the film. We then come to Tom Tom and a buddy killing a man before Eric arrives. Eric easily dispatches Tom Tom's friend, and before Tom Tom bleeds out, he asks where Shelley's engagement ring went, and that causes Eric to head to Gideon's pawn shop, where Eric finds Shelley's ring. Like the movie, Eric stabs Gideon's hand, but in the comic he ends up killing him and dousing the shop in gasoline when a cop enters and tries to place Eric under arrest. However, Eric says he can't be killed, and he offers for the cop to kill him. The cop is no killer, and so Eric tells him to leave the shop, as it will explode shortly. He tells the cop to give his regards to Captain Hook at his precinct. The cop contacts Captain Hook, who digs out Eric's file and throws it in the trash. Then Eric meets a young girl who thinks her life is hell. She is the daughter of Fun Boy's girlfriend, and it's clear she is neglected and abandoned. To cheer her up, Eric makes a necklace out of Shelley's engagement ring and puts it around her neck. He then goes upstairs where Fun Boy and the girl's mother are getting it on, and Eric tells the mother to return to her daughter while Eric takes Fun Boy's drugs and tells him he will meet him later. When later arrives, Eric bursts into a gin mill and slaughters everyone. Fun Boy laughs, stating how much fun he had with Eric's dead fiancée. And then Eric tells him he has 1 hour to find T-Bird, and if he does, he will have a quick death. There are flashbacks between these scenes of Shelley and Eric at a church praying, and then Eric damning God for his situation as he remembers the events leading to Shelley's and his death. In the comic, they are on the side of the road, and thugs find them. Eric is shot in the head, and it is then he sees the crow, which basically gives him the power to survive. He is paralyzed and watches the death of his love. Eric then wakes up in a hospital as Captain Hook speaks to him, even though he's considered brain dead. But then Eric speaks and is rushed into surgery, where he dies. And then after being declared dead, the crow resurrects him. We then return to the moment where Eric burns down his loft that contained every memory of Shelley and takes a moment to visit the young girl he gave the wedding band to. Despite the comic being so grim, these moments remind the reader that good still exists in the world and is meant to be cherished. He says goodbye to her and heads out to finish off T-Bird and Fun Boy. Meanwhile, Captain Hook arrives, and the healthy and safe cat Eric got for the dead Shelley is given to him. There is a note also left for the cop that Eric spared when he encountered him at the pawn shop. It asks the cop to look after the girl he just said goodbye to. Eric arrives when Fun Boy is doing drugs, and Eric tells him it's time to die. He states he's a monster and deserves to go to hell, and Eric tells him to take all of his drugs, thus allowing him to overdose. Then Eric finds T-Bird with a lot of protection. 15 men fire upon Eric, but their bullets don't kill him. The slaughter then begins. T-Bird tries to escape in his car, but it crashes. He crawls out of the wreckage, and Eric is right on top of him, and he is easily dispatched. Then Eric heads to the graveyard, and he has a discussion with the crow. The crow states that he needs to forgive, and Eric says he can never forgive those that killed Shelley. But the crow replies, "Not them, you idiot, yourself. You couldn't have saved her." He then needs to let go, to leave the world, and this sets his soul free. The comic was harsh and completely honest, as it was O'Barr's anguish which he suffered for a long time while working on the project. It was visceral and dark, but true to many who suffered tragedy and loss of faith. I knew nothing of this comic back in the day, as I was strictly a moviegoer, so I invited my buddy Christopher Moonlight to be co-host on this video to talk about his experiences with the comic release. And in later videos, he will return to talk about the movie.
Thanks, RT. So, I was a very imaginative teen, very outgoing, but also very different. I was artistic and attracted to goth culture. I liked horror and sci-fi movies, but also had a romantic side, which I think is why when I first came across the Crow comic book, I was so enchanted by it. Even though I lived in a relatively safe suburb, my parents were always fighting and eventually divorced. And because I was different, I learned that a lot of people could be casually cruel, whether it be kids my own age or adults who wanted conformity. I never felt entirely safe, and I knew a lot of people who were suffering from some form of abuse or another, had problems with drugs, or were just feeling lost. I was very sensitive to that and wanted to help by being someone who could be there and share in the burden. It seems naive and innocent now, obvious that it would be frustrating, difficult, and most often as futile as it turned out to be. Although I did count my blessings. I felt like I should confront these situations as a way of learning not to be so naive. I wanted to expose myself to the truth of things in the hopes that it would help me to grow up. The Crow, it was most impactful as a comic book for me in the way that it shifted from scenes of violence to memories of a happier time with a woman that deserves so much better than what she got. And then the song lyrics from Joy Division and The Cure, I knew them so well, and they seemed tailor-made to go with it. I would listen to them while poring over the beautiful layouts of the book. The stark black and white style made sense, and it was the first time I realized that anything is possible with not just comic books, but art. You didn't have to fit yourself into a particular box, but shape emotion out of style, method, and medium. That was very liberating to understand. No, I couldn't help every person with a painful situation that came my way, but I learned from James O'Barr that I could create potentially beautiful works that might help others make sense of their suffering and maybe even find their way back to something meaningful in the world. That's what his character Eric became for me, by enduring things I hoped no one else will ever have to, but knowing that at some point everybody will. Now, the comic book is a snapshot of a time past that my heart will probably live in until the day I die. Having seen it grow from a little underground comic book to a cultural phenomenon that has been handed off to younger generations feels remarkable, although I don't know if the impact will be the same, as it was part of a larger picture of that time with the music and how it moved the needle for a generation. It still inspires me as it did back then when I was trying to evangelize comics as a medium through books like The Crow, and I endeavored to publish my own photocopy comics and zines. It kind of makes me want to try something like that again with the new technology I have available to me, that we all have available to us. When you do something like that, you never know what it might turn into, as RT will elaborate on now.
Jeff Most was a successful television producer for many years at Columbia Pictures Television and wanted to get into films. The closest he got in the 80s to making films was a project that he optioned called The Specialist, which was based off a series of novels by John Shirley. Although Warner Brothers optioned the project, it was stuck in development hell during 1988. While the two waited for something to happen with The Specialist, Jeff asked Shirley to search for something they could option. At the time, Batman was huge, and another comic book movie named Dick Tracy was rumored to be the next box office king. Most thought maybe they should take some of their ideas and turn them into comics. That way, they could pitch it to the studio as if it was a comic book movie, thus possibly making it more appealing, but it just didn't work. John Shirley contacted some comic publishers with some of his ideas to make the comic book angle happen, and that was when he contacted Caliber Press, which was the home of their Crow comic. Caliber Press' response to one of John's pitches was this. They wrote me and said, "It sounds cool. We would like to do something with you, but Angry Angel is too much like something we already have, The Crow." Curious, John checked out The Crow, and it really grabbed him. He took it to Jeff Most, and the two knew The Crow was something they could work with. At the time, they both looked at the comic. It hadn't sold 1,000 copies yet, but they knew it felt right, so they contacted O'Barr. For disclaimer reasons, we need to state that when they contacted O'Barr, the author of The Crow stated someone else named Rachel Talalay contacted him about making The Crow as well, and was offered a deal, but he didn't like that deal. However, Talalay claims this isn't true. She stated Jeff Most and John Shirley pitched the film to her while she was working on Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and that she passed on it. Regardless, Most and O'Barr talked for hours about The Crow, and a deal was struck even though Jeff Most had little money. He promised that the movie would be rated R, and that O'Barr would be involved in the creative process and have a handsome back-end deal. Jeff Most gave him a token dollar for a 2-year option, because honestly, Most was running out of money. While O'Barr kept working on the series, Most went to studio after studio with little encouragement. Finally, he tried Ed Pressman, who was a heavy hitter with films like Wall Street, Talk Radio, and Reversal of Fortune under his belt, Ed was interested, but said he wanted it better, so they had to go back and work on the treatment again. When I finally counted up, I had 51 production companies and studios turn me down, and the 52nd place I went was Ed Pressman. I was running out of time, and it was very frustrating. With John Shirley in place to work on the treatment, they polished the project. Although Shirley wanted a straight adaptation to the comic, Jeff Most wanted to tweak the story, not only to make it more cinematic, but to appeal to Ed Pressman specifically, so compromises were made. On December 1990, a draft was given to Pressman, and a development deal was made. Jeff Most would be the producer of The Crow, while John Shirley became its screenwriter, working closely with O'Barr. The problem with the writing process of this film was the incessant notes from the execs who were assigned to the project. There was also disagreements between how closely to adhere to the comic. The biggest problem was Caldecott Chubb, according to Most and Shirley. Chubb was described as a corporate type by John Shirley. He would go on to recall how corporate types are, among the world's evilest. I think they kill people all the time, like covering up the toxicity they introduce to the environment. Shirley tried to meet Chubb's notes and to please him, but during the second draft, it turned into a disaster. I think Chubb deliberately set me up to write a script that could not be made because he wanted to get rid of me. Jeff Most stated that Chubb made things difficult because the direction Most gave John Shirley was often countermanded by Chubb, and thus two heads were trying to steer the direction of the project. When the second draft was turned in, it was a bust, and immediately Chubb tried to have Shirley fired. However, producer Jeff Most tried to keep Shirley in place by saying he would personally work beside Shirley, and for 8 weeks they would both put their thoughts into the third draft. Pressman agreed, holding off Chubb for a time. Jeff Most and John Shirley did a lot of changes on that third draft, which would eventually lead to many elements in the film. However, corporate ugliness finally occurred when they finished the third draft. They finished it 1 day late, and this is what happened. The day we were supposed to deliver, and we didn't deliver, they hired a writer they had standing in the wings, David Shaw. They were literally waiting to close the deal. They were going to do it anyway. So David Shaw came on and used all those things we came up with in the third draft, which were the changes from the comic. Jeff Most was ordered to fire John Shirley, and David Shaw was forced onto the project as a new writer. It broke my heart. I remember I went into a deep depression for a while afterwards. I had to take antidepressants for like a year. I had a relapse. It was a drag. It upsets me because I didn't get a chance to finish the project. If they changed anything major in this, Brandon Lee would still be alive, because I had a lot less violence in my script. When David took over writing, he would create the idea that Top Dollar would now be the chief villain, and he would have an incestuous affair with his Asian half-sister, Micah. David was a bit darker in his approach than John Shirley, and according to Jeff Most, he mainly rewrote dialogue and kept the bones of Shirley and Most's earlier scripts. To direct the movie, newcomer to film Alex Proyas was hired. Proyas had directed music videos and commercials. What made him appealing was that he had directed many of his music videos with a desaturation that made many of his videos seem dark. But the producer that caused problems before, Caldecott Chubb, kept interfering with the collaboration of the new writer, director, and producer, according to Jeff Most. He would say things like, No, that's all wrong. I can see it now. It should be this way. He didn't understand the 15 to 25-year-old sensibility the way Alex and I did. According to reports, Chubb kept pressing and was stated to be incredibly annoyed with his creative team to the point that he even started having problems with Ed Pressman. Eventually, Chubb would exit the company over a dispute between him and Pressman, but he still got a co-producing credit in the end. To cast Eric, names were thrown around by the creative team like River Phoenix, Johnny Depp, and Christian Slater, but the truth was, there was only one person the team really thought fit the part. and we will dive into this actor in our next video. But for now, we'll just end this video with one of this actor's interviews.
But so do you think The Crow's going to be like a franchise? Is it something, are we going to see Crow 18? Do you think the story has...
I hope not. It's a very self-contained story. Like I said, it comes from the graphic novel, and it really is a pure work. And once it's over, I mean, I haven't even begun to think about what Crow 18 would be. I just hope we shoot it someplace warmer.
We will see you next time. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, but sharing helps as well.